In a stunning and unprecedented admission, a retired American judge, Robert, has delivered what he called the most difficult speech of his life, issuing a sweeping apology to Burkina Faso, its President Ibrahim Traoré, and the entire African continent. Speaking with what he described as profound humility, the former jurist declared himself guilty of arrogance, blindness, and complicity in perpetuating systemic injustice when he presided over a $600 million case against the West African nation. For decades, he said, he believed the law was a shield for democracy and fairness. I stood on the side of the law, he reflected, believing that in every judgment I was defending justice. Yet, I was gravely mistaken. The case that became the breaking point was not, he argued, simply about money or contracts. It was about dignity. It was about sovereignty. It was about the lingering belief in some corners of the world that African nations are still bound by invisible chains forged in centuries past. Despite recognizing this truth, he admitted that he failed to act on it. I allowed myself to be carried by precedent, by arrogance, by the idea that the order of the world must be preserved, even when that order is fundamentally unjust. The judge directly addressed President Traoré. I did not just insult you as a leader. I insulted your citizens, your ancestors, and generations of Africans who struggled to break free from colonial chains. It was not a legal failure. It was a moral catastrophe of the highest order. The apology, delivered in a broadcasted speech, departed from the polished language of legal disclaimers. Instead, the former judge described his remorse in deeply personal terms. I apologize not as a jurist, but as a man, a father, a fellow human being who finally understands the harm words and rulings can cause when wielded without wisdom. He said his conscience had tormented him for months, haunted by images of young Africans marching with President Traoré's portrait, not because they worship a man, but because they saw in him the courage to resist what their ancestors could not. He said the $600 million lawsuit left scars far deeper than financial ones. The real cost was moral. The real damage was trust between nations. The real scar was left on the face of justice itself. His silence in retirement, he said, had become unbearable. This is why I speak tonight not to save face, but to tell the truth while breath remains in me. The retired judge went further, extending his criticism beyond his own failure to the entire system of international law he once defended. The law that I believed was the purest defender of human dignity became the very tool I used to diminish it, he admitted. He accused Western courts and institutions of routinely cloaking greed and domination in the language of law and fairness. Why Africa? He asked. Why has the continent that gave birth to humanity been chosen as the theater where global power plays out its cruelest performances? He denounced the double standard by which African leaders are branded defiant for asserting sovereignty, while Western leaders making identical claims are praised as patriots. I played my shameful role in sustaining that double standard, he said. To deny it now would deepen the wound I helped inflict. Addressing not only President Traoré but also African citizens, he apologized to mothers in Ouagadougou, fathers in Bobo Dioulasso, and children across the continent who saw their nation humiliated in a foreign courtroom. I want them to hear me admit without equivocation, this is not justice, this is not equality, and it must not define the future. He acknowledged that his words alone could not undo centuries of exploitation, predatory debts, biased judgments, and wars sanctioned in the name of peace. But he expressed hope that his confession could be one small crack in the towering wall of institutional arrogance that has long denied Africa equal respect on the global stage. Turning to fellow Westerners, he said Africa's rise is unstoppable, and the West faces a choice to respect it with grace or be left behind by history. Africa is not patiently waiting for our permission to breathe freely, he declared. Africa is rising with unstoppable momentum. The former judge emphasized that his statement was not intended as self-exoneration, but as an act of accountability. The verdict is unequivocally clear: guilty of arrogance, guilty of willful blindness, guilty of failing to respect Africa's sovereignty, He said he had deliberately chosen blindness, finding it easier to cling to precedent than to confront uncomfortable truths. In praising Traoré's resilience under international pressure, he contrasted the president's defiance with his own collapse of conscience. While you stood tall like an unshakable mountain, I crumbled like a house of cards in a storm. He called Traoré's example a lesson not just for him personally, but for the entire world. Africa is no longer content to be a silent participant in its own humiliation. The era of externally dictated terms is ending. He urged young Africans not to be discouraged by his failures, assuring them that they are the vibrant heartbeat of a continent whose time has finally come. To Western leaders, he argued that true patriotism is not blind loyalty to national wrongs, but the moral courage to admit and correct them. The apology, he insisted, was not the end, but the beginning of transformation. I will no longer remain silent when I witness injustice. I will no longer confuse legality with morality or mistake tradition for truth. He vowed to dedicate the rest of his life to dismantling institutional arrogance piece by piece, brick by brick. He acknowledged critics who might dismiss his apology as political theater or as too little, too late. Perhaps it is late, he admitted, but silence would be even later. True weakness lies not in admitting wrong, but in clinging to error. In closing, he addressed Africa directly. You do not need my validation to be worthy of respect. You are already defined by your resilience, strength, unity, and will to be free. But still, allow me this moment of confession. We are sorry for our arrogance. I am sorry for my role in perpetuating injustice. I was wrong, and I take full responsibility. He concluded with a plea for history to record this moment, not as isolated words of regret, but as the beginning of a turning point in international relations, a moment when Africa would no longer be judged by foreign courts, but respected as an equal partner in shaping the future. I choose equality. I choose universal dignity. I choose respect among nations. Justice without respect is no justice at all. Respect for Africa is not a diplomatic choice. It is a moral necessity.